Didn't have anything for breakfast today.
Okay, that's good to know, thank you. Basically, we're here to talk to you about the spending cuts, and so what are your thoughts on the government's comprehensive spending review?
Well, I think it was all a bit dismal, really. I think speaking to students and speaking to staff in the union and in the university, everyone's pretty united that it's not the best message for the public sector. And of course, there's a whole political debate going on in the country about whether these cuts are necessary, but that's rather redundant because obviously these cuts to higher education are going to happen. So in terms of higher education, we're still really, there's a lot more, the comprehensive spending review really raised more questions than it answered, but what we do know is the budget for universities in general is probably going to be cut by around 2.9 billion, which in terms you can actually think of is 40% cuts over the next, by 2014. There's a bit of a debate going on whether it will actually be 4 years or 5 years, but in any sense it's a very big cut, and it's also obviously a cut in real terms, because obviously we've seen reductions before, but this is probably the unprecedented really in the level of cuts to higher education budgets, even in sort of Margaret Thatcher's years as Prime Minister, where university funding took a big knock. We didn't see anything on this level. So what we're hoping, of course, is that it will be phrased carefully over those 4 years so it doesn't hit us straight away. But I think there are going to be really big cuts that could really negatively affect the quality of education students are receiving. And of course it's very much tied to the issue of tuition fees, and the government's rather kind of Machiavellian idea really is to say, well, we're cutting this amount of money from the university's budget, but this amount of money could potentially come in if you were willing to raise tuition fees. So I think it's a bit of a two-pronged attack really, and I think the nightmare scenario is we're going to see students paying more for less really, because tuition fees will rise to about £7,000 a year, whereas in fact we'll still see big cuts in what universities are able to provide.
Okay, thank you very much. Will these cuts affect you personally?
I think they certainly will. I think they'll probably affect any students studying here just in personal terms, because obviously I'm someone who's going to be looking for a job in a few months' time, because a lot of our students are already going into a rather tricky and a contracted graduate job market, but there will, I think, be less jobs available in the public sector given the kind of headline figures of thousands of public sector jobs going, and particularly Sheffield, I think, as a city might be particularly hard to hit given the numbers of people who work in the public sector and some of the cuts we've already seen to public services here. So I think they will make it harder for me personally to find a job. I'm very lucky that I've got a job for this year, so it's a privilege to be doing this, and I need to find something else soon really. So I think also as a student they will affect me and they will affect others, because although there's still an ongoing debate around tuition fees and what money will be coming in, we certainly know what money's going out, so the university is going to have to do try and offer more with limited resources. So it's about, and that's something we as student officers will be working with the University Executive Board, the Vice Chancellor, the Provost Chancellors, and just academics and staff across the university to try and make sure that these cuts impact as little as possible on the quality of education students receive. But I think there's no way that Sheffield University can exist in a bubble, and these will affect student experience here.
Thank you. Will the student union have to make specific cutbacks, or is it too early to tell?
It's too early to tell, though I would say that we're very grateful to the university for the way they have funded the Students' Union in the past, and we very much hope that the subvention we receive, which is basically the block grant which funds the Students' Union, will continue along the same levels. And of course, if higher fees do come in, one of the key things we'll be arguing is, well, this should mean more money for the student experience, more money being put back into student services such as the Students' Union. So in reality we'd be wanting even more money, but I do think at the moment we'll be very lucky if we don't have to make cuts. It's too early to tell when we'll have to make them, but this is potentially very worrying for the Students' Union, and given we actually employ a large number of students ourselves as kind of casual staff, and we're actually the 16th biggest employer in Sheffield, just the Students' Union, and I think with some of the kind of economic developments we're seeing in Sheffield, we might actually go up that list. So I do think cuts to the Students' Union isn't just a cut to the Students' Union, it's a cut to the jobs we can offer to the people of Sheffield and the services we offer. So it's too early to say, and it's too early to panic, but I do think that's a possibility.
Thank you. And finally, I just wanted to ask you, how do you feel about Nick Clegg and his involvement with the coalition government?
Well, personally, the main thing we're trying to bring pressure on Nick Clegg about is his pledge on tuition fees, because he, of course, as you may know, signed a pledge before the election, during the election campaign, saying, I pledge to vote against higher tuition fees and to campaign for a fair alternative. And the Liberal Democrats manifesto was actually promising they'd bring in free education. So now sitting in government, I can't really see how they can really get away with, although they're going to give it their best shot at doing so, saying, well actually, although we promise you free education, we're not going to bring you free education, we're in fact going to raise tuition fees. And I think it's going to be a very difficult political battle for them, and from the students' view, obviously representing our students, we're going to do all we can to try and stop students having to pay high fees, because I think they'd be incredibly divisive both for Sheffield as a university, but damaging for Sheffield as a city and as a broad society. I think the social divisions we also see very much in Sheffield would only be deepened and made worse by higher fees. So I really think there is an issue of trust here, and it's something we as students, but also local residents in Sheffield, should be doing all they can to try and bring pressure on Nick Clegg to keep that pledge and stand up for students and stand up for the people of Sheffield. And I think on some of the wider issues, such as the cuts we're seeing to the obviously kind of cry de coeur as it's become, and of course celebrating Sheffield, to use a random classical tags, to Sheffield Forge Masters. The cut there has been particularly damaging for the local economy and for local people, and also just for the morale of the city. And given the high number of people we've got working in the public service in this city, I hope that Nick Clegg can bring any influence he can to lessen these cuts and make sure that Sheffield doesn't suffer as a city, because of course it's also rather silly, because every person who loses their job is going to be someone else trying to claim unemployment benefit and need to be supported by the state. So I really don't think at a macroeconomic level this policy is particularly good for Sheffield as a city or for our students. So we've got to hope that Nick Clegg has some influence he often talks about and can lessen that effect. But we're not too happy with him at the moment, but we're willing to try and work with him and bring as much influence on him as we can to show him that this is an important issue for students, for their parents and for all his constituents. And I hope we can get a good working relationship going there and try and see what he's saying on these cuts and how he's justifying them to Sheffield and the arguments he's making. So I do look forward to working with Nick Clegg as a students' union and as his constituents over the coming years, and trying to get him to keep the promises he was elected on, and hopefully have a positive impact on the city rather than the negative one on the city and the university I worry these government policies could have.
Okay, thank you very much for your time.
I was making a light there, I think.
Bye.
The Nick Clegg issue.